everybody. It's Helen Hillocks, intuitive counselor and licensed therapist for 35 years. And I am here today with Rowan Bombadil, and I'm very excited to have them on the show. And I will tell you a little bit more about them in a moment. But first, I want to say welcome to the Sacred Sexuality Revealed Summit. Passionate intimacy, deeper connections, and lasting sexual desire. And I'm so excited to welcome you. I'm so excited about this summit. We have amazing speakers of so much diversity and so much wisdom. And I know you're going to get just an amazing, life-changing experience every time you watch an interview. So welcome today. And I want to tell you just very briefly about why I'm doing this summit. Two reasons, really. One is that I grew up in the era of the sexual revolution, where there's a puritanical background running in the country. And then there is also this almost compulsion to be promiscuous and have lots of sexual experiences. And I had lots of sexual experiences that were not sacred at all. I put myself into jeopardy, had abortions, abuse, many painful things that left me feeling a lot of shame about my sexuality. And I know a lot of you have had similar or different experiences, but have been left with unanswered questions and bad feelings about yourself. And maybe you've suppressed your sexuality altogether. So I can really relate to you personally in my own history. It took me a long time to discover sacred sexuality, and I don't want it to take you that long. So that's one reason. And the other one is I became a licensed marriage and family therapist, as I said, 35 years ago. And I've worked with countless individuals and couples who have had struggles around their body image, connecting to other people, difficulty having sex, not wanting it all the time, whatever the iteration is of their sexual challenges. So I wanted to do this for you also. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to dive right in with Rowan right now. Welcome, Rowan. I want to talk a little bit about you. Reverend Rowan Bombadil is a UK-based queer sex witch. I love that title. Psychosexual coach, interfaith minister, dedicated to bridging the binaries between sex and spirit. And that's what we're here for, guys, is bridging the binary between sex and spirit. Their work inspires individuals and groups of genders, orientations, backgrounds, and bodies toward a more radical, creative, and intersectional vision of conscious intimacy. In their coaching ceremonies, or coaching, ceremonies, workshops, and events, Rowan seeks to facilitate personal and planetary transformation through pleasure. I want to just stop and underscore that sentence because I love it so much. They want to facilitate personal and planetary transformation through pleasure. I just think that's so incredible, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Their book, Igniting Intimacy, Sex Magic Rituals for Radical Living and Loving, was released by Llewellyn in December last year. So I am over the moon to have you, Rowan. I'm just so excited. Just reading that little bio about you, I'm not kidding, I have goosebumps right now. It makes me want to cry because you're taking on the whole deal. You know, every iteration of sexual identity, the micro, the macro, you know, the individual, the relationships, you know, romantic, all the way to let's change the planetary view. And that just touches me because I feel like so many times we don't acknowledge that this is really a planetary issue. And so that totally touches me. I just wanted to say that. Anyway, we'll dive in. It's early in the morning here, and my mind is not is not as fast as it usually might be. So let's just dive in. We're going to talk about all different kinds of things. But the first thing I always ask every speaker is, how do you define sacred sexuality?
So I was thinking about this one, and I decided I want to be really, really cheeky, if I'm allowed, and broaden the term that we're trying to define a little further and maybe go with something like conscious intimacy, among other reasons, because I feel really strongly at the moment about finding principles, finding practices that deepen and sustain and make ecstatic all types of relating, whether or not they include a sexual component. So if it's all right with you,
my favorite, that is totally my favorite, Rowan, is expanding the definition. I think that is an incredibly important part of this whole summit, and all of the speakers, is the idea of expanding what is sacred sexuality. So love it. Dive in.
Awesome. Okay. At the moment, at this point in time, the five most important components for me are awareness, intention, a sense of the sacred, an ethical code, and a willingness to grow. And I have a feeling you are going to have all kinds of rich and wonderful conversations about awareness, about, awareness of self, awareness of other, presence to the space between us. So I'm not going to dive too deeply into that one. And I know we're going to talk about magic later, so I will dive more deeply into intention then. But I do want to unpack the final three. So what do I mean by a sense of the sacred? Because I know the sacred is an edgy word for a lot of people, and there are a lot of really valid reasons for that. We've been given a lot of pain and shame under terms like sacred and the divine and God. And so I want to really be clear about what I mean when I encourage people to bring a sense of the sacred into their relating. On the one hand, I think of the Hebrew term kadosh, which is often applied to couples after marriage, and it can mean sacred, but it can also be translated as separate. And so what I mean by bringing a sense of the sacred is encouraging people to treat their relating as a sacred act, a sacred thing, to allow it the separate time and space and energy, the specific time and space and energy that it requires to be nourished, to flourish, to deepen. So sacred in that sense, treating intimacy as a sacred thing, as a sacred practice. And then also sacred in the sense of allowing for the possibility that there is something bigger than me and you in the space between us. And I think that is important because relating, and I'm thinking particularly here about any kind of long-term, sustained, and really, really intimate, really deep, really truthful relating, it's one of the hardest things that we can do as human beings. And I think anyone who's had a bash at doing that knows those moments where maybe we both feel kind of broken open or broken apart, and neither of us quite has the resources to kind of step in and, do what needs to be done next for the relationship, or to feed the children, or whatever it is. And so I think for me, there's something really important about allowing for the possibility that there is something greater, whatever you want to call that, whether you want to think about that as the love between you as a kind of a third entity in its own right, or whether you want to think about that as the God of your understanding, whatever it is. But I think there's something really important about allowing for the possibility that there is something else between us. And for me, that allows me to lean back, to lean into that space, and trust that maybe there's grace even in the moments where I don't feel like I've got this, or the other person or people don't feel like they've got this. But there's going to be some grace in the space between us. The word grace, yes. When I'm really inspired by the work of Nadia Bowles-Weber when I talk about grace, in terms of grace being that that love that is available to me, even when I am in my darkest moment, even when I'm at my most broken, my most pained, my most shamed, there is love available to me. That is grace. And I think that's important for us relationally as well as individually.
It reminds me of faith, not in an entity or a religious way, but faith in the connection, and to me, that's kind of what you're saying about that, there's something bigger than them and me,
Yes.
and that it's that faith that even in those moments, I don't know if we're using the word interchangeably, faith and grace, but I love the word grace. I mean, it's such a precious word, but I love the idea that we have faith that the love is there even when we can't see it.
Yeah. And I really love, I'm thinking particularly of the writer Anne Garrity here, who suggests that our love is this third entity that lives in the space between us and has its own agenda. And its own agenda is to create more of itself. And one of the reasons why I appreciate that idea or that concept is that in those moments where I can't see why this is happening in the relationship or where this is taking us, the possibility that the love between us is doing its thing, is on its journey, is guiding the way through the dark. Yeah.
I love everything you're saying. I wanted to ask you about, you were talking about the sense of sacred and the kadosh, and that it's that we need to think of our romantic sexual intimacy as a separate sacred experience. How do you relate that to the idea that some people espouse of, expanding your idea of sacred sexuality to include making everything sacred? Can you talk about the distinction there, or if there is one, or maybe it's just a way of talking?
Oh, I want to sit with that one for a minute.
Well, I'll just say something, and maybe it will help you. It's helped me a great deal to remember that conceptualizing sex as sacred is the same principle of feeling my connection to nature and the sacredness and the actual body experience of connecting to nature, to me, feels like a romantic, I'm in love with nature, and I feel turned on, not in an orgasmic, in an orgasmic kind of way, just in a different orgasmic kind of way. And so that has helped me so much, because expanding it out of the bedroom has helped me bring it back into the bedroom, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is why I'm interested in kind of, talking about intimacy in a broader context than kind of just specifically sexual relationships, because I think if we bring that sense of sacredness and that understanding that intimacy of any sort thrives on being given space and time and energy, just the way that anything else we do thrives on those things, but we need to kind of carve out sacred, if you like, sacred space in order to be intimate, whether that's with a partner, whether that's with ourselves, whether that's with a family member, whether that's with the natural world, whatever it is, but bringing that sense of intentionality and sacredness. And I guess the separateness is another way to think about the separateness is presence. Is I'm going to give, even if it's just for these 10 minutes, I'm going to give my full presence to this other being that I'm relating to. whatever form that being takes, right? I'm gonna give you my fullness. I'm gonna really be present to the space between us, because that allows that space to then work its magic, do its thing, find its flow, be enriched.
So it's really more about the focus of your
Yes.
energy is what makes it separate. It's not separate from your life. It's just it's a distinct intentional focus.
Absolutely. Yes.
I love that. And I can imagine just seeing you in that beautiful surrounding with your red seat or couch and that incredibly gorgeous fabric behind you, that you have created sacred spaces in a visual way as well.
Oh, yes. I have a real, I take a real delight, particularly in altar building. I really love building altars for different intentions, for different purposes, for different relationships. So one of the things that the people who live with me or come into my space notice is the number of small sacred spaces or intentional spaces that I tend to fill my environment with. And maybe if we have time later, we can talk about relationship altars, which is, yeah.
I just think that's an important aspect of creating that sacred experience, is providing a sacred space in which to experience it.
Yes.
I think so many times people, they're in a messy, cluttered bedroom, and the energy just does not support that sacredness. So I knew you would align
Yes.
with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes.
So back to
the definition.
Sense of sacred.
Yes, sense of sacred, an ethical code. I know you're going to talk to Barbara Corellis at some point, and I really love something that she says to erotic professionals when we're running the Urban Tantra Professional Training Program. And what she says is, I don't care what your ethics are, but you have to have some. And I think this really, for me, applies to conscious intimacy as well. And your ethical code ideally will be an organic thing, an evolving thing, but you need to come in, for me, you need to come into intimacy with some awareness of what your relational ethics are. And they might be to do with how do I intend to treat the other person, and how do I expect to be treated? What can I bring to the table? What am I not willing to bring to the table? What are my bottom lines? What are my alarm bells? All of those things. So coming into connection with an awareness of what those are and an ability to articulate them and share them, I think makes for both a more conscious and a more consensual experience for everyone involved. So having an ethical code feels important.
I love that. And I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, but what got triggered in my mind was the phrase, you can't say yes if you can't say no.
Yes.
And that does that relate to that?
Absolutely. I think it does, because if we can come into intimacy with an awareness of what we're bringing to the table, how we want to relate, what our relational strategies are, and also, what we're longing for, what our vision for relationship is, then we can lay our cards out on the table in front of the other person and go, how does this look to you? Is this a set that you're willing to engage with? And where is our common ground, and is there enough common ground for us to relate in the ways that we are longing to relate?
And how that relates to safety.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
If you feel that you are having an open, honest and caring conversation with the other person about what your intention is and what you are dreaming of, it sets the stage. I mean, I know we could go into that for the entire time. It's just talking about the need for that, but I appreciate that being on your list.
And then finally, the willingness to grow. Some days, I think for me, this is the biggest one. Other days it's not, but some days for me, this is the biggest one. And what I mean by that is being aware that this will happen for a start, and being willing to be cracked open, to be confronted, to discover the places in yourself where you would like to make change, or where change is needed to be transformed by love. And I know that, a sentence like that, to be transformed by love, oh, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? That sounds magical. But really what I'm thinking about here is I'm thinking about Gibran describing love's threshing floor. And I want to acknowledge I think this is one of the main reasons why people perhaps turn away from a more conscious, a more sacred model of intimacy, because it is excruciating. Let's be honest here. It is absolutely excruciating. We're talking about being seen. And, so much of this work that we do in the conscious sexuality field is about facilitating that. It's about facilitating being seen. It is excruciating to be seen. And I think more than that, for many of us, particularly where shame is present, which, let's us face it, is the majority of us, it is excruciating to have what is seen loved. It is excruciating to have what is seen loved. And I'm not talking here about somebody being like, oh, darling, I love you just as you are. It's all fine. I love you. Human attempts at unconditional love, which is a kind of relational spiritual bypassing very often. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about two people sitting together and seeing each other, and seeing each other in our mess and our multiplicity. And yes, the areas where we know change is needed, and, sitting with someone and being like, yeah, I see you. I see the things that you want to change. I see you struggling to know how to do that. And I'm just going to sit with you in this, and I'm going to love you. Just going to sit with you in the discomfort, and I'm going to love you. That is absolutely excruciating stuff.
And why is that? I mean, I love that term. I am definitely taking that idea, that love's thrashing floor. Oh my God. I love that phrase.
Yes, I have that poem somewhere. Let me pull it up and just grab that piece. Yes, like sheaves of corn, he gathers you unto himself. He threshes you to make you naked. He sifts you free from your husks. He grinds you to whiteness. He kneads you until you are pliant. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire, that you may become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. Wow. Excruciating. It's an excruciating process.
Would you talk for a moment, Rowan, about why it is so excruciating to be loved, to be seen and loved? Why is that so painful for us? And I know this is going to relate to what you were saying in the biography about transforming the planetary as well as the personal.
And I think it's going to relate. I know we're going to talk about diversity later, and it relates to that as well. I think the short answer is shame. And then I think one of many slightly longer answers is that right now we live in a culture where our window of normalcy, what is normal, what is acceptable, what is valuable, is extremely narrow. And it's not a humane window. It's not a human window. It is an extremely narrow window. And I notice myself thinking about it in terms of it has a very mechanical quality. It has very straight edges, and intimacy with other human beings is a very organic thing. It's messy, it's dirty, it's gritty, it's, covered in fluids, it's
transforming constantly. You can't You can't fit
Absolutely.
in that.
And in that, we inevitably, particularly if we enter into conscious intimacy, intentional intimacy, we inevitably, and if we enter into those practices, that intimacy that requires us to be seen, to see and be seen, we inevitably are seen in the parts of ourselves that do not fit that narrow window. And when our entire infrastructure, when everything we walk through on a day-to-day basis is geared up, is kind of fine-tuned to constrict us into that narrow window of what is valuable, of what is okay. Those moments where intimacy cracks us open, cracks that window, cracks those edges, cracks those boxes, really pulls the lid off who we are, and we are revealed in our organic, natural, messy selves. Yeah. Allow someone else to see that.
I want to be really transparent here and say that as you're speaking about this, I am feeling myself transformed. I am feeling myself energetically opened. It makes me cry. I'm feeling myself sexually attracted to you and what you're saying and your energy. And it's like, the willingness to open myself. I am a primarily heterosexual woman, but it's like I allow myself that. I feel in love with you in this moment in a very real way.
Well, I think we have to mention Audre Lorde here and the uses of the erotic and her definition of the erotic as this, as something that puts us in touch with a deep feeling and a depth of feeling and a primal power that lives within us. And that the way that definition just blasts open the erotic to be something that is far greater than just sex or just how we culturally define the erotic. Yeah.
Right. It's not about genitals and parts and friction. It's
about a depth of feeling, a capacity for life, and a drive for joy and for a life joyously lived.
And for the recognition of oneness. It's like the more you speak and the more aligned I feel with what you're saying, the more open and attracted to you I become. And I'm sharing that, not because, I'm saying, I want to go to bed with you. I mean, it's the acknowledgement that if we allow ourselves that, it's everywhere. It's everywhere you can find, because this is how I think of it, Rowan. Let me, bounce this off of you, is that if we are one, if we come from the oneness, if we're all little bitty chunks of the oneness, or as some people might say, children of God, that's another way to me of just saying chunks of the oneness, then I'm seeking that feeling of oneness in a very, in a cellular level, in my soul. It's like that's what lights me up. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling that with you, then that to me is sacred sexuality. Yeah. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful feeling that I want to encourage people. It's related back to what you were saying about we have such a narrow view of who we allow ourselves to be connected to in that deep way. And we've been taught to be so afraid of it. Mm. And partly because many of us, including myself, have felt that feeling of oneness and acted it out in ways that were painful ultimately, rather than following your steps, about the sense of the sacred and the ethical and the, intentionality and all of that. So I think we've come to be afraid of that rather than saying, and I know this is part of your work and the sexual magic, which I want to get into, is to, instead of looking for safe places where we can experience that, where we don't come out of it saying, oh, I betrayed my wife or whatever, but we are allowed to feel that incredible magical feeling in a way that feels ethical to us.
And we're also encouraged to be afraid of it because it is powerful stuff, right? Because we're talking about ways of connecting, not just to, and I use the word just here, that is, it's not really the word, but not only to practices and ways of relating that will give us, bigger, brighter pleasure. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about practices that will connect us to our power, to our sense of our own aliveness, to our innate creativity. And
courage.
Empowered, embodied, creative people are dangerous
To the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel drawn to have you talk about your own journey and how it led to, what you're doing now and your definition of sex magic. Does that feel right to you to talk about that now?
Yes, I can absolutely.
The embodiment of all of this. And I really want the audience to feel your courage.
So before I do that, I want to acknowledge something which is that, in being invited to share my journey, I'm choosing a thread here that is just a thread in the tapestry of a life. And I guess I'm referring back again to that sense of messiness that comes with being human, right? I'm pulling a thread out here. And I just want to be mindful that our culture really loves overnight success stories, right? Because quick fixes are very easy to sell, So I just kind of want to acknowledge that this is just the thread of a tapestry, and for me as a creative person, particularly, I really appreciate it when the creatives that I look up to, that I'm inspired by, whose work nourishes me, I really appreciate it when they take the time to share their struggle, to share their false starts and their failures, because I'm human, because I'm stumbling and I'm struggling and I'm fucking up, right? And I'm reading
real.
Yeah, I'm reading Patti Smith's Year of the Monkey at the moment, and just feeling so grateful and privileged to get to watch her during a year of profound horror, personally and politically, just put one foot in front of the other and stay open to the mystery. Because so much of the time, I think, especially now in this time in history, so much of the time, so many days, that's all we can do. So I just kind of want to say that before I kind of draw that thread.
I love that. I love that, Rowan, in the context of this whole discussion about sacred sexuality and working to change the conversation about it. That's exactly one of the main reasons I'm doing the emphasis on building deeper intimacy, is because our society looks for, what's the newest toy? I want a shot in my clitoris to make it respond more. I mean, whatever it is, and I'm not dissing doing interventions that really do support you, but everybody is looking for that quick fix. And so I love what you're saying. It's very much in alignment. We have to be willing to do the work. And like you said, your fifth step of, whatever, to, willingness to grow. Oh my God. Required.
Yeah. Willingness to see and be seen in the mess. So yes, I was in a mess. One of my bigger messes, some years ago now. The relationship that I was in at the time was causing me a devastating amount of suffering. My fledgling business was really flailing. There were days when I wasn't quite sure where the next meal was going to come from or how I was going to pay the rent. And I got into a real cycle of breaking down in the face of all of this, and in the face of kind of the way that it seemed like there was a new problem, there was a new challenge every day. I got into a real cycle of kind of breaking down under the weight of that, and then pulling myself back up and kind of trying to soldier on and find the way to fix the next thing. And during this time, I had a visit from an old lover, who at some point inevitably during the visit kind of turned to me and said, okay, what's going on? What's happening? And after I'd, explained a little bit about how my life was unfolding, he sort of sat with it for a minute and he said, have you tried praying? And I said something suitably, sarcastic to the tune of, well, it hasn't been bloody working. And he sort of sat with that for a little while. And then he said, I find prayer to be most effective when it comes from a place of surrender. Why don't you just admit that you can't do this? Now, I'm not gonna delve into the kind of full story of my background and the acute independence that was encouraged in my household growing up. But suffice to say, it is indicative of how tough things were, that I was willing in that moment to go, okay, sure, I'll give this a go. You know what? I can't do this. And as I said that, it was as though a skylight opened up somewhere inside me. And in the weeks and months that followed, and as things got slowly but very surely better, I realized that I had gotten into a habit of treating, I'm gonna use the word God here, but listeners can be spiritual adults and insert into that space whatever word they want, whether that's cosmos or higher self or unconscious or whatever you want it to be. I'm gonna use the word God as a short way of describing my imaginary friends. I realized that I'd gotten into this habit of treating God as something of a consultant. So I would kind of soldier on, do my thing, born coper. And then when something went wrong, I might say, oh, hey, God, I need you to come in and I need you to fix this thing and I need you to do it just so. And then once the crisis had passed, I'd be like, okay, and now you can go back in your little God office. And after that experience, it dawned on me, and it is still dawning on me, that, God is less of a consultant and more of an annoying best friend who knows precisely what I need and has already thought up three better ways to get me there. And so out of that, one of the things that arose out of that for me was a new understanding of magic. So traditionally, magic has been defined as manipulating energy, whether that's your own energy or natural forces, but manipulating, channeling energy to help you to manifest whatever your goal or desire, whatever the purpose of your magical working is, right? So there's a sense of kind of magic being a way to have power over something to get what you want. Mm-hmm. And for me, magic is more about power with. For me, the question at the heart of my magical practice and at the heart of the practices that I teach is, how do I be in radical intimacy with life, with the God of my understanding, with the cosmos? How do I be in co-creative relationship rather than reacting or rather than trying to control? How do I be intimate? How do I co-create? How do I do what is mine to do today and trust that I can surrender the rest, that the rest is out of my hands. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. The idea of not reacting and not controlling.
Mm.
I mean, those are, we might as well have been born with those tattooed on our wrist, you know.
I would certainly own to that. Absolutely. Yeah.
We've all been taught to react and blame other people for whatever we're feeling. And then as a way of managing anxiety to try to control reality. Yeah. And I love your discussion of radical intimacy with life. Okay. So we're going to move on to a natural extension of that, which is how do you support people to co-create with magic? And I'm using that word very specifically, co-create. And would you expand on that?
Yes. So one way to describe the material that I teach might be sex magic. And I want to talk a little bit about that, about why sex and magic and what they,
yes,
why that combination, what they do for each other. So magic, traditionally, in order to do a magical practice, that might look like, we use the term raising energy. Some practitioners talk about exhaustion. But either way, you're looking for a physical or an emotional practice that is going to kind of help you achieve a trance state, an altered state, a different state of consciousness. And so traditionally, physical practices might include things like drumming or dancing or chanting. Emotional things, you might be looking at things like emotional crises. You can look at things like awareness practices, like the use of the breath. And so all of these have kind of traditionally been used in magical practice to kind of raise that energy that we want to, depending on how you look at it, that we're going to dedicate to our purpose, or get ourselves to such an altered state that we can allow the seed of our intention to really get into our deep unconscious and take root. And so this, of course, is where conscious sexuality comes in for me, and is that perfect intimate dance partner for magic, because of course conscious sexuality at its best taps into all of those things. It taps into our body, it taps into our emotions, it's supported by the breath, by our presence. So it's kind of this perfect match for magical practices and for boosting, giving our magical practices that boost of energy that they traditionally require. And then for me, there's also, so purely from the point of view of a magical practice, using the erotic, using sex is a really potent thing to do, and it's a pleasurable thing to do, and there's something to be said for pleasurable practice. That is a practice that, certainly I know I will return to, I will come back to, right? And the point of practice is repetition. So a pleasurable practice is also a really potent thing. And if we then okay, so that's how sex supports magic. Well, what can magic bring to our erotic lives? There's a huge wealth there. There's a sense of magic for me, giving back as good as it gets. So when I teach magical practice, when I teach magical ritual, it has the following components. I talk about creating space, talk about intention, raising energy. There's that raising energy. Again, release, surrender, and giving thanks. And I want to based on the conversation that we've had, kind of pick up two of those threads particularly.
Well, would you, before you do that, the internet was a little wonky there for a second, and I didn't get those 5 or how many ever you said. Would you please repeat those?
Yes. So we have creating space, invocation, setting intention, raising energy, release, the moment where we release our intention to the cosmos or to our deep mind, surrender, and giving thanks.
I'm taking some notes here so that I can write up something about this talk. But I mean, if I were going to really summarize it, it would be 10 pages long. Anyway, go ahead. So you're going to pick up a couple of threads.
I'm going to pick up a couple of threads. I'm going to pick up 2 of my favorites, and I'm picking.
And I want us to be mindful of the time too, because we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want people to know what your free gift is and how to contact you. So I do not want to cheat you or them out of that 2-minute talk.
Right. So, yes, I'm going to pick up intention and surrender. 2 of the most important pieces for me, and the balance between them as well, I think, is a real medicine. Not just for our erotic lives, but also for our time. So intention, what do we mean by setting intention? By setting intention, I mean defining what is the purpose, why are we, what is the why of our magical act. And it has an aspirational quality to it, this setting of intention. It's clarifying, but it's also aspirational. It's usually about qualities rather than specifics. So I often like to define intention as opposed to expectation. Expectation is a closed door, and intention leaves space for the miraculous. And it is a miraculous thing, intention. I mean that both in kind of a mysterious way, but also in an intensely practical one. So from the mysterious perspective, I notice for myself and my clients that sometimes we set an intention, and that's all that's needed. Suddenly the cogs kind of get rolling in the universe, or get rolling in our life, and that intention we were going to do magic for, we don't feel the need to do magic for anymore, because just stating out loud, this is the purpose, this is the intention, this is the wish, gets those moving. But also from a practical perspective, intention, especially when we're working with another person, intention, I love intention because it gives us an opportunity to, it gives us a greater chance of being allies in anything that we do. So intention can transform anything. It can transform any time spent into quality time, or any series of activities into meaningful action. Can transform the erotic, yes, the magical, yes, but also even just a conversation. Because if I sit down with you for, say, a difficult talk, and I say my intention with this is to understand where you're coming from so that I can connect with you more deeply, that gives me a much better chance of, that gives you a much better chance of getting on side. That gives me a better chance of having you as my ally in what we're doing together, than, say, me sitting down and going, and another thing about that washing up you didn't do last week, So yeah, intention, both mysteriously and practically, a very powerful piece of the puzzle for me.
And raises the energy just in the doing of that, as you said.
Absolutely, that clarification, that clear message to myself, to my beloved, to the cosmos. That in itself, that seed, that plants that seed, whether or not we do ritual around that. And so that's the kind of if we think about it in terms of motion, that's the sort of forward motion, the doing piece. And then on the other kind of end of the arc of the magical piece is surrender. And can I read a piece from my book?
Yes, if it takes 1 minute, we're supposed to be
I
done.
think it will.
We're supposed to be done in 1 minute. While you're looking for that, I want to say, I think my understanding is the intention, is our part of putting our energy out there, and the surrender is allowing for God's part to intervene
Absolutely.
with us.
Absolutely. It's making space. It's making space for the mystery to come in. Absolutely. Um, here's what I wrote in my book. Surrender is not just a vital component of magic and sex magic rituals. It is also medicine. And it isn't just medicine for our bodies, for our pleasure, for our relationships. It is medicine for our time. Surrender is the antidote to the anxious malaise of pleasing, perfecting, and performing. It is the being to our culture's incessant doing. It sits on the other side of the scales from creativity to create a satisfying and sustainable existence. Practicing surrender in our erotic pursuits expands our capacity for receiving, for pleasure, for ecstasy, and it also serves as a signpost towards self-acceptance, open-hearted relating, and a life well lived.
That's so beautiful. You're
Much needed
so,
medicine.
yes, and you have such a beautiful way with the language, whether it's speaking it or writing it. I want to acknowledge that. It's really beautiful. It's been it makes me want to cry. It's been a great pleasure connecting to you. And please tell the audience about your free gift and how they can contact you, Rowan.
So I'm realizing that this is a conversation you and I have not had, and I am not prepared for it.
The free gift part?
The free gift part, yes.
Well, you don't have to do it, and you can let me know later. If you decide to do a free gift, you can just let me know, and it'll be written under the materials in the interview. So you don't have to do that right now. Just tell them how to contact you.
You can find me at makinglovewithgod.co.uk, and there is a contact form there as well. And yeah, I would be delighted to hear from you. And I'm also going to plug this baby. Here
Absolutely.
It is. Igniting Intimacy, Sex Magic Rituals for Radical Living and Loving is my book. And that's currently available all over the place, but I was particularly delighted to see that it's now available on Better World Books, which is one of my favorite places to buy books online.
Better World Books.
And I believe that for every book bought, they donate a book to places where books are needed, which is really
lovely. So makinglovewithgod.co.uk.
It's the one.
Okay, so thank you again so much, Rowan. You're just a powerful, powerful, magical person, and I so appreciate the work that you're doing on the earth, and I appreciate you being with us today to share your magic with our audience. I know it's going to change people's lives as it has mine.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure. I'm so touched by the passion and enthusiasm, and I know the sheer volume of hard work that is going into creating this beautiful resource for people. So yeah, just thank you for inviting me to be part of it, and my wish is that it reaches everyone.
I wish that too, and whatever the universe has in mind, we can intend for it to reach everyone, and we can surrender to whatever God has in mind.
Indeed. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Be well.